revived his wounds and came back to settle here in the Washington area. And he later wrote that it was as he was working on his college degree that he began to come up with this idea of building a Vietnam Veterans Memorial right here on the National Mall. Now imagine what a crazy idea that was. Some guy in his 20s thinking that he could convince Congress to approve the first memorial on the mall since the Jefferson Memorial opened in 1943. We didn't even have a World War II or a Korean memorial yet. And here was this crazy guy trying to build a Vietnam Veterans Memorial. But James Scruggs was on a mission. He had seen how America had treated our veterans when they came home from Vietnam. And so many of the movies in the 1970s, movies like Rambo, Apocalypse Now, or The Deer Hunter, tended to portray our veterans in a pretty negative manner. Scruggs said he had to do something to change this country and to bring some honor and respect back to our veterans. He was able to find two very influential senators, Senator Charles Mathias from Maryland and Senator John Warner from Virginia. And those two senators actually got legislation through Congress in less than a year. In fact, when the bill hit the floor of the Senate, it had 100 co-sponsors. And there's only 100 senators. So every U.S. senator had co-sponsored the bill. President Jimmy Carter signed the bill on the 1st of July, 1980, authorizing the Vietnam Veterans Memorial right here on the National Mall. For those of you in the audience too young to remember the Vietnam War in the 1960s, that war tore this country apart. Not only was it America's longest war, but it was America's first televised war. Never before in our history had Americans seen all of the horror of war in living color on the evening news. Month after month, year after year, as the war drug on, the more controversial it became. The last thing that anybody wanted, was a memorial here that would also be controversial. And so they did everything they could think of to keep controversy out of this memorial. First of all, it was decided that whatever was going to be built here would not be built with tax money. Only private contributions from the American people. Nearly $9 million was raised, not a penny of it from taxes. They also decided they were not going to hire an architect to design it because they knew that nobody would ever be happy that it was the right architect or the right design. So instead they decided to have a contest, and they opened it up to all U.S. citizens 18 years of age or older. They hoped that would bring the nation together again. They appointed a panel of 8 judges. You would think that a panel of judges for a Vietnam Veterans Memorial would include some Vietnam veterans. Well, it didn't. There wasn't one Vietnam vet on the panel of judges, but that was intentional. That way nobody could ever say that a Vietnam vet had influenced the design in any way. And also when entries came in the contest, they required those submitting designs not to put their name on their entry, but instead to put their name in an envelope and to tape it to the back of their entry. And that way the judges would have no idea whose designs they were looking at. Now, if you're going to have a contest, you have to have some rules. There were only 4 rules in the contest to design the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Rule number 1 said the memorial could make no political statement. We'd already had enough politics with this war. Rule number 2 is that the memorial had to maintain the park-like setting of the National Mall. It had to fit in with the landscaping. They didn't want another Lincoln Memorial or Washington Monument built in this section of the National Mall. Rule number 3 is the memorial had to be a place of contemplation and reflection, a place for visitors to come to and remember the cost paid by this nation. And rule number 4 is that the memorial had to contain the names of all of the dead and the missing. And that was it for rules. So you can imagine they were going to get a huge variety of ideas submitted. 1,421 entries came in the national contest. So many entries, they actually had to use a hangar out at Andrews Air Force Base to lay all of the entries out in. Well, the panel of 8 judges spent nearly an entire week going through all 1,421 entries. And I still find it absolutely amazing that at the end of the week, all 8 judges had picked one design. It's the design that you see in front of you, the memorial that many of us now simply call the wall. Well, they had done everything they could think of to avoid controversy, so guess what they got? Controversy. The critics hated it. Newspaper editorials, politicians, even some Vietnam vets. Some said it looked like a giant tombstone. Others called it America's version of the Wailing Wall. The fact that it's black and below ground in a city of white marble memorials like Lincoln, Jefferson, Washington, the Capitol, the White House, here was black and underground. And the criticism did not stop just with the design. The critics attacked the person that designed it, the winner of the contest. Because you see, this beautiful memorial had been designed by a 21-year-old college student from Yale named Maya Lin. And the critics screamed even louder. Maya was young, female, not a veteran, and of Chinese descent. Now, Maya was born in Athens, Ohio. She had every right to be in the contest, but Maya's parents are from China. And China had been one of the largest backers of communist North Vietnam during the war, and it upset some Vietnam vets to think their memorial was being designed by someone of Chinese descent. But although Maya was only 21 years old, she went on to defend this design at a number of hearings, and in the end that young woman convinced the critics that this should be the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Now, no one should be surprised to know that Maya Lin was an architecture major at Yale. In fact, when she saw this poster up on campus advertising this national contest, Maya decided to enter the contest and to turn her project in as a school project as well. Well, it turns out they have some pretty tough professors at Yale, because hers gave her a B+ on it as a school project. I got to meet Maya Lin a couple of years ago, and I said, "Did you really get a B+ on this at school?" And she said, "Alan, he never liked a thing I did in his class." Fortunately, the judges thought it was A+ work. Maya's class had actually come down here to the National Mall from Yale, and she later wrote that it was here that she came up with her idea for the memorial. Now, Maya later wrote she didn't even know much about this war. She'd been too young through most of it. Maya said the only thing that she really knew is that the war had torn this country apart. Just for a moment, I'd like you to imagine the land behind me without the wall there. This was just simply a gently rolling hill. Maya Lin would later write that the first thing that she envisioned was a giant knife cutting a huge gash or wound in America. She peels the hillside back, and the wall becomes the wound, the cut, the scar in America that had been the loss of those 58,000 men and women. And I always do the talk from up here because it's easier to visualize the knife puncturing into the earth, digging deeper and deeper as the casualties grew, and finally pulling back up out of the earth. Maya Lin chose to use black granite. Black is not symbolic of defeat or shame. Black is symbolic of earth. It's a cut into the earth. She used granite for a very specific reason. Maya knew that granite would last hundreds of years, but more importantly is the symbolism of granite. Granite would act as the permanent barrier between the living and the dead, where we could not enter their world and they would never again be able to enter ours. But Maya Lin also knew one other thing about black granite. And in my opinion, it's the most important thing about this wall. Maya Lin knew that when you polish the surface of black granite, that the surface of the memorial would get like a mirror. And so as you look at a name on the wall, you're actually looking at yourself and their reflection. And Maya Lin said she wanted us, the living, to see our reflection in their names, to help us remember that they were just like us, a son, a brother, a father, a best friend, or a boyfriend, maybe the kids you sat next to in school. In fact, in 1984, President Ronald Reagan spoke here at the memorial, and I still remember a line from his speech that day. President Reagan said, "Visitors will come to this wall to find the name of a loved one, and when they finally find the name, they will find it in their own reflection." In fact, the reflections from the wall are so powerful, you can see the visitors reflected all the way up here on the plaza. So one of the contest rules is the memorial had to contain the names of the dead and the missing. Well, the rules didn't say how the names needed listed. And Maya Lin could have done it any way she wanted, but the way she did it is the reason she won the contest. Visitors have asked me, are the names listed by state, or by branch of service, or by rank? One of the most frequently asked questions, why in the world aren't they alphabetical? It would be so much easier to find a name on the wall if they were in alphabetical order, but there are 667 men named Smith on the wall. Maya Lin said she didn't want the memorial to look like a telephone book. What she did say is that she wanted the memorial to tell the story of a journey. And so she tells the story of the journey, the story of the Vietnam War, written day by day in the order that they died or went missing in action. Listing the names chronologically by day does several very powerful things. First of all, it turns the memorial into a diary, writing the history of the war day by day in the very names themselves. Secondly, is that it puts men who fought together and died together forever together on the wall. You may have had a squad of 8 or 10 guys from 8 or 10 different states, and maybe the only time they were together as a unit is when they were in Vietnam, but if they died together in battle, they're forever together on that wall. And also Maya Lin said she wanted our Vietnam veterans to be able to come back to this memorial and to find their own place in the journey. So if I know when a veteran served in Vietnam, I can get him or her back exactly in front of the panels to be with the guys they served with. Many of our volunteers are Vietnam veterans. I can often tell when a volunteer served in Vietnam because when they come back here to the wall to volunteer, they always stand in front of the same panels. They're back with the guys they served with when they were over there. So now we know the names are chronological by day. Most visitors, as you can see, come in from this side. And I can guarantee you that some of these folks right now are telling their friends that they think the names start at this end. Except for the visitors that are coming in on the other side. And then I often hear them tell their friends that maybe the names start out at that end. It seems logical that the names would start at one end or the other. Well, that's exactly the way that Maya Lin did not design it. Maya Lin chose to start the names in the center. At the deepest part where the panels are 10.5 feet tall, there's a marker for 1959. Many folks don't even think we were in Vietnam in the 50s, but Eisenhower sent our first men on 1 November 1955. But our first 2 men killed by enemy fire, Major Dale Bice and Master Sergeant Chester Ovenand, died 8 July 1959. And so Dale Bice and Chester Ovenand are the first 2 names on the wall under the 59 marker. The panels then begin to read like pages in a book, day by day, panel by panel, 29,000 names out to the 25th of May, 1968. And that's just the halfway point. It swings around and it picks up again, May 25th, 68. And it marches all the way back in, another 29,000 names. And it ends with the names of our last 18 men killed on the 15th of May, 1975. So why in the world would Maya Lin design the memorial this way? Well, her answer was so simple and so powerful. She said she did it this way so that the first and the last would be together. It was her way artistically to bring closure to America's longest war, 16 years. So it starts in the center, symbolically goes full circle, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, side by side, at the deepest section of the memorial. Maya Lin said she wanted it so that as visitors came in from either side, that they would walk down into the valley, the cost of war getting more and more powerful around them, until at the deepest section, where it's a very quiet place, you will meet the first and the last together. And to show you how long this war lasted, some of the young men killed on the last day, on the 15th of May, 1975, were only 18 years old when they were killed. They were only 2 years old when Dale Bice and Chester Ovenand died in 1959. But they're forever together, side by side, bringing closure to the war. Maya Lin said as visitors exited the memorial, symbolically they would walk back out into the sunlight. She pointed the western wall right at the Lincoln Memorial. The eastern wall points directly at the Washington Monument to symbolically cradle the memorial between two of our greatest presidents. On the memorial, there are no references to rank, race, religion, gender, or branch of service. They all wore the uniform of the United States, and they all paid the same price. Black or white, Jew, Christian, male, female, a private or a general. In death, everybody's equal on that wall. There are several symbols that are used on the memorial, and every name has a symbol beside it. Most names have a diamond by their name. A diamond means they've been declared dead. But when the wall was built in 1982, we still had 1,256 men listed as missing in action. So alongside of their name is a small plus symbol, symbolically a symbol of hope. Over the years, as we've normalized relations with Vietnam, they've allowed our search teams back in. We've been able to find and identify the remains of nearly 500 missing in action. And when that occurs, the engravers come back here to the wall in May, and they change the pluses to diamonds. They changed 8 pluses just a couple of weekends ago, now dropping the total of missing in action to 761. Visitors also often ask us about the many items that have been left here at the wall. Well, you may leave something at the grave of a loved one, like flowers or a teddy bear. Well, so too have visitors been leaving items here at the wall since 1982. And with the exception of flowers and perishable food, the National Park Service has kept everything. Over 130,000 items now in the warehouse. And I have seen everything imaginable left at this memorial. Combat boots and helmets, flak jackets and dog tags, medals and POW bracelets, sea rations and P-38 can openers, Zippo lighters, a wedding dress, caps and gowns at graduation time, fishing rods, baseballs, basketballs, footballs, high school yearbooks, 1960s record albums, cans of beer, packs of cigarettes, bottles of Jack Daniels, anything that may remind somebody of a loved one or somebody they served with. A couple of years ago, in August of 2008, on a Saturday morning, we came down along this western side of the wall and found one of the most powerful things that I have ever seen left here. Overnight, someone had left a cigar box. And when we opened the cigar box up, inside of it were nearly 24 love letters that had been written from a soldier in Vietnam to his girlfriend back here in the States. She'd even enclosed some photographs of the two of them together before he shipped off to Vietnam. He was killed in August of 1968, and so his name would be along this western side of the wall. That woman had kept his love letters all of those years, and on the 40th anniversary of his death, she brought his love letters back to him and placed them in front of his name on the wall. On Memorial Day 1995, we came down to the wall and we found a Harley Davidson. Well, it turns out that the Harley had been built from scratch, all from donated parts, by a motorcycle club from Wisconsin. And no member of the club had ever been allowed to sit on that bike. And they later interviewed the president of this club, and they asked him, why in the world would you leave a Harley at the wall? And he simply said, well, our club goes out for a ride just about every weekend, and if a brother from the wall wanted to come with us, we wanted him to have a bike. The wall will be 29 years old this November. It's hard now to imagine how this beautiful memorial could have been so controversial. But the critics screamed so loud in 1981, they actually forced a compromise. And that was a decision to add something more traditional, like the three servicemen statue. Added 2 years later and done by a great sculptor named Frederick Hart. Hart depicts an African-American, Caucasian, and a Hispanic soldier representing over 95% of the men who served in Vietnam. And even though Hart's attention to detail is outstanding, he shows no reference to branch of service or rank because he wanted any of our veterans to be able to identify with them. In fact, Hart's attention to detail is such that if you look closely, he even shows one of the soldiers with one of his dog tags laced into one of his boots. It was not uncommon for a soldier to separate your two dog tags, to keep one around your neck and sometimes lace the other dog tag into one of your boots. But what I've always found most powerful about the three servicemen is actually where they're placed. Because to many visitors, they look like three young men who have just come back from patrol, exhausted in the heat and humidity of Vietnam. And as they step out of the tree line, they stop in shock, suddenly confronted not by the enemy, but by a black granite wall with the names of more than 58,000 they had served with. Others think they've stopped up here not wanting to get any closer because they're afraid they'll find that their own name is on it. The beauty of art is that it's whatever you see in the eyes of those men. And finally today, we had nearly 10,000 women serve in the U.S. military in Vietnam, and their sacrifice is noted here as well. About 100 yards down the walkway is the Women's Memorial, dedicated on Veterans Day of '93, and done by another great sculptor named Glenna Goodacre. Glenna depicts three uniformed American women aiding a wounded U.S. soldier as they wait for the rescue or dust-off helicopter to come in. And even though that soldier appears to have suffered a terrible chest wound, Glenna would later write that what kept her so focused on completing the sculpture was the belief in her own heart that the soldier does not die, but is saved by those three nurses. We're often asked if there are any women on the wall. Well, the military's changed a lot in 40 years. We've already lost over 150 women in Iraq and Afghanistan. But in Vietnam, they were mostly behind the lines in support roles. About 85% of the women that served were nurses. There are 8 women on the wall, all 8 of them nurses, 7 Army, 1 Air Force. They're listed right along with the men in the order that they gave their lives. But around the Women's Memorial are planted 8 yellowwood trees in honor of the 8 women on the wall. Ladies and gentlemen, America and her veterans paid an enormous price in the 20th century, not just for our freedom as Americans, but for the freedom of others around the world. We don't have a national World War I memorial here in Washington, but remember that we lost over 116,000 men in that war that was supposed to end all wars. We finally got our World War II memorial. At the far end of the reflecting pool, in it is a field of gold stars. Each star represents 100 U.S. dead or missing. There are 4,048 stars in honor of nearly 405,000 we lost. The inscription in World War II simply says, "Here we mark the price of freedom." Across the reflecting pool is the Korean Memorial, where we honor another 36,000 Americans who gave their lives to keep the people of South Korea free. There the inscription is only 4 words. It says, "Freedom is not free." And here at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, the price of freedom is written in the names of 58,272 of my heroes. And I would ask that you not forget that just in the past several weeks, America has now passed the 5,900 mark for the number of young men and women that we have lost serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, this beautiful weekend here in Washington, D.C., as you make your way around our nation's capital, I have just one favor to ask of you. And that's that if you should happen to see a veteran, maybe one in your own family or one traveling with you in your group, certainly veterans aren't hard to identify today here on the National Mall, please take a moment and go up to him or her and just say thank you for helping to keep this great country of ours the land of the free. On behalf of the National Park Service, thank you all for coming to see us today at the Wall. Have a great weekend, everybody.